Welcome to the Lounge with Travefy Academy, where we get to hear from travel industry voices and experts to learn more about their story and what they see on the horizon for travel professionals. And I'm Stephanie Grice, and our guest today is Jeff Ment, who's managing partner at the Ment Law Group. So welcome to the Lounge, Jeff, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Stephanie. How are you today?
Doing well, and excited to have you because I know we've chatted before and you just got back from like ASTA conference speaking there, but there's so much going on legally that we don't always get to bring in experts like you to talk about this very, very important stuff. So I'm really excited to have you here. So thank you for spending the time on sharing this stuff, because I know we're going to get into some current topics. But before we do that, though, can you just share a little bit more about your background and how did you find yourself, kind of helping out the travel industry?
I feel like, Stephanie, my career in travel began long before you were born. But
Could have been.
my my career started when I was 14. So that was about 43 years ago, in my mom's travel agency, filing brochures, answering the phone, learning Sabre, which at the time was one of the first GDS systems out there. And we had basically gone from books to computers overnight, and the world of travel changed. So I've been in this for about 4 decades.
Wow.
Yeah, I feel like it's been a long time. My dad's a judge. My mom was a travel agent. And so I come out to be sort of a blended concoction of a travel lawyer.
That is really cool. So that's awesome. Yeah, you really did blend it together. So that is really cool. And can you share too, like when you go to school, go to law school, do you focus in on like the tourism travel industry? Is that kind of how that works?
So the answer is generally no, with some mild exceptions. I was in law school in Miami working for Eastern Airlines. Again, gone before you were born, probably. Went out of business in 1991. And I was working for Eastern, going to law school. So I did take classes in aviation law and maritime law, because at the University of Miami, something like maritime law would be pretty popular. So my life plan was to be a lawyer for Eastern Airlines, but they let me down and left me on the side of the road when they went out of business.
Dang. Yep.
It's
See,
something else.
in the maritime, that's really cool. Yeah, I would have been, I actually, what I was one, I did not know that airline. I've never heard that name, but I was 1 year old. So I was just a baby.
You weren't flying yet, but yeah,
No,
Eastern was just like Delta. Delta was Eastern's main competitor, and
interesting.
like Delta, Eastern had hundreds of aircraft and flew all over the world.
Wow. Oh, that's so cool. It's really cool again to hear like the mold of both of those together. That's super cool. So in your experience of all the decades of work, you've probably been through a lot of crazy things, seen a lot of very interesting events take place in the industry, legal wise and all that. But what are some of them that's happening right now? I know one of them that some advisors have started talking about, it started about a month ago, maybe, is the whole new DOT rule of refunds with like flights and all of that. I know there's all this chatter going on about it. So can you just share a little bit more about what that is and what's happening?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway in the beginning is it's not going to be so bad. So for the agents who thought like, oh my God, the end is near, that's not going to be the case. But yes, the DOT decided after years of thinking about and trying to figure out how to handle refund complaints, the Department of Transportation came out through a formal rulemaking process and came out with a new rule about issuing customers refunds under certain circumstances. It captures travel agents possibly in the net because it uses a phrase called ticket agent. A ticket agent could be a travel agent, but it doesn't mean that every travel agent is a ticket agent, because airlines long ago abandoned travel agents when they stopped really paying them commissions to book air. So when airlines stopped giving commission, travel agents stopped doing ticketing, with some notable exceptions. So the issue now, this is a great rule for the flying public. Whether it's going to be a good or a bad rule for travel advisors is yet to be seen, but it has to do with a requirement to issue a refund if your flight is going to depart or arrive 3 hours or more different domestically, or 6 hours or more internationally. So let's say you go to the airport in Chicago for your 12 o'clock flight, and there's a terrible snowstorm. This has actually happened to a lot of people, by the way.
Yeah.
You get there and you wait hours. Now at 3 p.m., no matter what's the situation, that airline has to now offer you a refund. So if you're willing to go back home and not go on your flight, you can get a refund. So if that ticket was non-refundable, it's now refundable. If, however, you accept to go later that day at 5 o'clock, you don't get any compensation for the delay. You're only being paid if you do not accept the airline's accommodation. The way that travel agents get sucked into this vortex is if they issued the ticket and are the ticket agent or the merchant of record. The law actually says that the ticket agent is just as responsible as the airline to issue the refund. So just contemplate that for a minute. You're a travel agent. You've made next to no money doing the ticketing of an airline ticket. You aren't the airline. You don't own the plane. You don't have any control over the weather or the maintenance or whatever. But suddenly the customer can say to you, Stephanie, issue my refund. And Stephanie's going to say, wait a minute, I want American Airlines to issue the refund. The law doesn't say that. The law says that within 7 days, that credit card has to be refunded, or I think within 20 days, a cash refund has to be made if paid by some non-credit card source. So this is going to cause travel agents to be nervous when they are the agent of record, which ASTA contemplates to be less than 10% of the time. So ASTA, through its great efforts to go out there and try to figure out the impact of this new law, has come back and determined shouldn't have a big impact on travel advisors. It will impact travel advisors who are doing ticketing or collecting the money from passengers and then passing the money on to a consolidator. So sometimes travel agents go through consolidators to issue airline tickets. Sometimes travel agents do a group through an airline, but the travel agent collects the funds and is the merchant of record. So the phrase merchant of record, which we never really thought about, to tell you the truth, it was never something we ever thought about until the world of chargebacks came roaring at us during the pandemic. And we quickly learned that if you were the processor of that payment, the merchant of record, it was your bank account that was going to be debited in the event of a successful chargeback, or potentially now in the case of an airline refund. So if you're a travel agent who does ticketing, this is some pause for concern about the impact. If you're a travel agent that does no ticketing, it's of no significance. If you're a travel agent and you do ticketing, it should now be part of your terms and conditions that you have, because the Department of Transportation regulates that certain things have to be in your terms and conditions if you're doing airline ticketing. This is one of those things. Another one that you sometimes see is the warning that your airplane may be sprayed with some chemical in some foreign country with you on the plane or off the plane. The disinfection clause. This is going to be one of those similar provisions you'll see in the small fine print. It's a long answer, but
That is so interesting. No, that makes a lot of sense. And broken down too. It's almost like the advisor's just the middleman when they're, and they're the ones. So then if that happens, the chargeback, then it's on the travel advisor to refund that money. And then the travel advisor just has to work with the airline then, I'm assuming.
yeah, doesn't that seem like the David and Goliath backwards story, though?
Yeah.
The travel agent has to say to Delta, hey, I refunded the money for Stephanie's ticket. Now I need you to refund me the money. The DOT, this was a sticking point that ASTA really rallied hard to try to not put travel agents in the middle. But the final rule has a footnote about how ASTA says it's a very small percentage. So I don't think the DOT thinks it's going to be a big deal to us, but it only takes one giant refund to put Stephanie's travel agency in financial peril if you've had to issue this refund. It's suggested that the airlines and the travel agents need to work together contractually to come up with a plan so that you're not the bank for the airline, because you don't really want to be.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds so scary and disastrous, and
But it
especially
won't
for
be.
those. Yeah, but
It's going to be okay. It's
it'll be
not going to be a
okay.
disaster.
It'll be okay. Well, and one thing I want to ask too, and I know this could be like a separate podcast about this, but when you talk about like terms and conditions, a lot of times, especially for newer advisors who are entering the industry, kind of single entrepreneur on their own, terms and conditions, how do you know what to put in there? I mean, I'm assuming you just really need to work with a lawyer on that, or is that what you'd
So
recommend?
the choices are copy somebody else's and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Make up your own and hope for the best. Call somebody who has some idea what they're doing, and then you will be in the best shape of all. Every travel agent needs something. This really only becomes ultimately important if something bad happens, but you want to just outline who's responsible for what. There's plenty of things that can happen in the travel business. Travel agents shouldn't be responsible for 99% of those things. There's always that opportunity a travel agent could make a mistake that is a problem. But the other 99% of the time, it's not the travel agent's fault. For instance, it's not the travel agent's fault if you get eaten alive by bed bugs at your hotel in the Caribbean. But you could be blamed if you're the travel advisor. So your terms and conditions should say you're not responsible for the services provided by other parties like hotels or motor coach companies. The travel advisor is not out there kicking the tires on the bus to make sure they have air in them. But again, if you don't say it, you might be responsible. A travel agent is like in a triangular relationship. And the different corners would be the travel agent, the supplier, and the customer. And it kind of just spins wildly around, who you're working for and who you owe a duty to. And that can get the travel advisor stuck in the middle. And so these terms and conditions can help protect the travel advisor when that vice is coming closer to squishing them. And it's that piece that will deflect away the attention and save them.
Mm-hmm.
Dramatic. It's not really that dramatic in real life, but that's the image you want to have.
Yeah, I mean, it could be too, because something really big could happen. And like you said, like something, it could be really detrimental. Like it's simple, like small things could really rock your business. But one thing I was thinking of is with going back to like the airline refunds. So will travel insurance have to kind of change their wording too? Because how would that, like when they have travel insurance as well, do they
Yeah,
have to kind of change what they're doing?
yeah. So travel insurance is like the stop loss gap preventer. So if you get your money back from the airline, that's the best outcome possible. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't get your money back from the airline and you're making a trip interruption claim, which would be the most likely in the scenario we're talking about, keep in mind travel insurance, typically the big things are trip cancellation, trip interruption, sickness, lost baggage, and cancel for any reason. Those are kind of like the 5 things that travel insurance can do for you. So travel insurance has always been in place if your trip got interrupted. Now you're going to be able to get a refund if that interruption cancels the ability to travel, but you still need travel insurance if your trip is interrupted. The best example probably would be if you're going on a cruise tomorrow and you're flying there today, but the trip is delayed, so now you're not going to get to the port on time. You may miss the first part of the cruise. The airline's not going to owe you anything because they're going to get you there, albeit a day late. But your trip interruption part of your insurance policy may kick in to provide you with some of the expenses that you're going to have to catch up to the ship, which is now someplace else.
Yeah. Interesting. Yes. So still very important for the insurance and all that. And
You're
so
still going to need it. Yes.
yeah. Yep. Still gonna need that. Well, that's really interesting. And thank you for explaining that. That was a really great way of understanding like what's happening. And when do we expect for that to actually take place again?
The DOT rule will come fully to life in October, in late
Okay.
October of this year. So in the fall. So about four months and 3 weeks from now.
Perfect. And another thing that's coming down potentially around that too, another really hot topic right now is the whole like FTC non-compete and then, independent contractors, just a lot of different things going on there. Can you share more about that as well? Because that also is impacting the travel industry potentially.
Sure. So I think that if the your audience are most made up of travel advisors who are either hosted by somebody else, so they're an independent contractor hosted by somebody, or they might be a host agency hosting people with them. And so that arrangement is not an employment arrangement. That's an independent contractor relationship. That's how the travel industry has been for decades. Instead of independent contractors, we used to call them outside agents. So in the older days, outside agents is synonymous with an independent contractor. Those were people who did it when they wanted, as much as they wanted, as little as they wanted, at night, as a second or third job, with really no strings attached. Travel industries definitely that has been the working model. Some agencies employ people. We totally understand there's sometimes reasons why you want to do that. When you employ people, you get to control them. When they work, what they do, their productivity, what their metrics are for success or failure. You don't get to do that with independent people. What's happening in the world around us is that the current administration in Washington disfavors independent contractor relationships and very much disfavors non-compete provisions. The travel industry loves the independent contractor relationship. We don't have any complaints. We don't have complaints from the people or the companies. Everybody likes that relationship. But it may not be up to us anymore. It may be taken away from us or whittled away what we can have or not have for independent contractor relationships, because in other industries, companies chose not to hire people and kept them only as independent contractors, and thereby weaken people's ability to get benefits like insurance or overtime, or people like in the newspaper delivery industry, which is an industry of like the olden days, but it's one of those industries like the milkman. Like you don't see the milkman anymore either. But these things were out there, and companies made them be independent contractors, Uber drivers. There's a whole world of people who don't want to be independent contractors but aren't given a choice. The travel industry has long offered the option to people to be an employee or an independent contractor. But unfortunately, the tides are turning, and we may no longer have that option. We still have it in California, because if you think back to like just a couple of years ago, big reforms are underway in California. There's a giant effort to ban independent contractors. It was a law called AB 5. And it ended up, through ASTA's good efforts, allowing the travel industry to still have independent contractors. But how long will our good fortune hold out? Only your crystal ball will be able to tell you that. But on non-compete provisions, they are going the way of the dinosaur. It doesn't really matter what we think or what we want. And this is probably for the better because some agencies have long held that if you worked for them as an independent contractor or an employee, you couldn't leave and compete with them. That's really not fair. That really is an impact on your ability to earn a living. And so states have been chewing away at non-compete provisions. Some states ban them outright. Some states allow them only if you earn a certain wage. So it has to be a wage higher than a certain threshold that you can even have a non-compete provision. So if you're a host agency and you're listening to this possibly interesting conversation, mildly boring to some, but
No,
if you're
interesting.
listening and you're thinking about it, you really have to look at what does your state allow you to do for a non-compete provision. Very few of you are going to be happy with the answer if you're an owner, because you're pretty much not going to be able to have a non-compete. What you could have, though, is a non-solicitation provision, which means that if an independent contractor is going to leave and now go to a competing agency, they still cannot steal or solicit your other independent contractors. So there should not be a flood of people leaving on the same day to go to the same other host agency. Might it still happen? Yeah, 100% it might still happen. But you should have a non-solicitation provision. You should have a non-disparagement provision. You can't say bad things about either side. You should have a confidentiality provision about intellectual property or confidential stuff you learn at Stephanie's agency. You shouldn't be able to now take to Jeff's agency and use it over here. So those provisions are still alive and well. But the ones with the faint heartbeat would be non-compete. The pulse is almost gone. And on the independent contractor relationship, that patient is still alive, but for how long, we don't know.
That is
That's
really,
summary.
yes, no, it's so interesting. It really isn't. And when can we expect that stuff to happen too?
The fall of this year is going to be very
Okay.
interesting. This is when all this
Yeah.
is supposed to happen. But I think all of this hinges on who wins the election in November. So we're not here to talk about politics, but the politics of the November election will impact the Federal Trade Commission, because the Federal Trade Commission is an extension of whatever the current administration in office is, just like Cuba. Cuba, the ability for us to go to Cuba rises and falls on who's in office. That seems kind of weird, but it does. I mean, our ability to go to Cuba has changed vastly going back to Obama, Trump, Biden. And I think, unfortunately, these things like non-compete and independent contractors are riding that same roller coaster where whoever comes out on top in November is going to get to have some control over these things that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So stay tuned. We might have to do another podcast later on this year and be like,
Come back in
let's
November
revisit.
and talk about how this is going to be or not be. Could be all
Yeah,
about nothing. This could be a wasted conversation.
true.
I'll go
That's
into
the
the
thing.
annals of your podcasts and
I
never
know.
compete again.
I'll have to come back in the show notes and be like, just kidding, everybody. We're all good. All of this stuff is fine. Well, and it is really interesting. Like, what are some of the? Has there been anything else lately that you're like it makes a big fuss and it was nothing? Like, has there been anything else recently or that you think is coming?
So, about maybe a year and a half ago or so, a travel agent was sued over the death of a passenger customer who went to Mexico. And that made all of the trade publications. Travel agents getting sued, client dies in Mexico, travel agent blamed. And that really hasn't turned out to be much ado about anything. I mean, but it's just another example of what can happen to you and why you want to be careful on what you say as a travel advisor and what you do, because travel advisors can really only get stuck in the middle of a lawsuit for giving bad advice, not warning about something that they should warn about, or picking a bad supplier. So we always will have examples of things like that happening. And I think that when it first came out and was reported in the trade press, it seemed like the beginning of the end. We're going to get sued anytime something happens to somebody. The reality is we don't usually get sued. Bad things don't usually happen. But you want to be careful and keep away from saying things like, it's going to be a really safe vacation.
Mm.
It might not be, Stephanie. It might not be a safe vacation. You hope it to be. So you want to be careful on the representations that you make. You want to not overextend yourself and say things that you cannot guarantee. The weather's going to be great. It might not be. The people who went on the Royal Caribbean shore excursion in New Zealand and got eaten alive by a volcano, they thought it was going to be a great day, right? White Island. Netflix has its own thing
Yep,
about
I
it,
watched that.
right?
Yeah.
You see the thing billowing and running, and those people just went on a shore excursion, for Christ's sake. They thought they were going on a beautiful day, shore excursion, and kaboom. Now, I don't know of any travel agent that's been sued for that, but I certainly know Royal Caribbean's been sued for that. And that's another good reason why the travel agent wants to have terms and conditions that say we're not responsible for things we don't control, like that. So these things happen. They've happened the entire history of travel advisors. We're no worse now than we were. Every advisor should have some form of insurance, typically errors and omission insurance. Could do a whole separate podcast on the terms and conditions of insurance, but everybody needs to have it. If you're a IC of a host, you want to ask the host about the insurance if it's covering you, because you may be responsible for the deductible if a claim is made. And if you find out that deductible is $50,000, that might shock you into wanting to buy your own error and omission policy with a $500 deductible. These are just things you want to think about. And I know you're friends with the host agency review people.
Yeah.
I think I saw you did a podcast with Stephanie.
Yes, and you answered one of the questions in the podcast that we did. You
Yes.
just, yeah. So I was like, perfect.
So, that's another great place to get a lot of good information where you can find out about these different issues that could impact an independent contractor in making decisions about what they're doing with their travel business.
So true. Yes. I was actually just going to ask too, where are good resources? So yeah, host agency reviews, shout out Steph Lee. Awesome. Amazing. I know also, ASTA, American Society of Travel Advisors. It's also ACTA for Canada, but what are some other really good resources to stay up to date? Like, what do you personally use to stay up to date on stuff?
I read Mark Pestrunk's Travel Weekly article every week to make sure that I'm not missing out on something. So that's how I think I have to stay abreast of current legal affairs, because I think Mark's a genius in the travel law business. You got to read Travel Weekly, Travel Age West. You have to read Travel Market Report. You have to stay on top of what's happening. Canada has another one, Open Jaw, I think, which is an airline term. I think they have a daily blog that comes out about travel law in Canada. You have to stay on top of reading those things so you know what's out there. A travel advisor, the word advisor is a significant word, because where else do we find that word? We find that word in financial advisors. We find that word meaning that people are going to rely on advice you give. Advisors need to give good advice. To give good advice, you have to be informed about what you're doing. It raises the level of expectation of what you should be doing as a travel advisor. And I think the best way that you can do that is to know the industry. And for the advisors that are listening today that are new in the industry, you're getting in at the best time that I can think of in the last few decades, because travel is robust. There are so many different specialty niches that you can go into. Social media has expanded the opportunity to connect to people, and just learning, taking courses, taking some host agencies that offer training, it's worth it. It's going to be worth it. Don't just get into this industry because you're going to take your family on a reduced rate to Disney World. I mean, that's a reason people do it, but you got to be in this for more than just that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's very well said. And so many great resources. That's the good thing. And it is really important to stay on top of them because when you were saying that, I was literally thinking I've seen in Facebook groups where, something happens in, another country. And then all of a sudden their clients are asking them and are worried. And like you said earlier, it's important to know how to talk about it. You can't just say that hardly ever happens. It's not going to happen to you. Don't worry. Like you have to be careful about what you even say and how you approach. I mean, really important reminder right there because I do not think about
For
that.
the listeners today that have been around a while, you've made it through 9/11, you've made it through SARS, swine flu, bird flu, Ebola, Zika. I mean, all of these things have happened. I mean, not to mention volcanic ash, labor disputes with air traffic controllers in France. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen in this industry because we are really the world. I mean, we take people all over the globe. And so the idea of being able to dispense good advice means you have to know something about what you're selling.
Exactly. Yeah. That's awesome. And I'm gonna put for all those listening too, I'll put those in the show notes. I was taking notes as of all the resources that you were talking about. So I'll make sure to put those in the notes. So that's amazing. And I want to thank you so much for your time. But before we go, I didn't tell you we were doing this, but we have rapid fire travel questions for you.
Okay.
So really fun stuff. So there's 6 questions here. The first one is, what would you say is your favorite travel movie?
Oh, George Clooney, the airplane or the airport, right? Whatever the name of his movie is.
Yeah. Wait, what is that? I'm trying to think. I'll have to think of that. I know what you're talking about, but someone's listening. They're like, it's this. I know what you're
Then
talking
of
about.
course, again, dating myself, which I'm sad to keep doing, but the airplane movies, the series of movies called Airplane, like things like Airplane 1975 or Airplane
Yeah. Yeah. Like those ones are the Up in the Air. That's what it is, by
Up
the
in the
way.
Air.
Yep.
Okay,
So
I'm going
I
with
just
that.
Yep, that's perfect. And yeah, there's a lot of like all the airplane ones. Yeah. So okay, another question here. What is your favorite destination that you've traveled to?
Okay, I'm going to go with 2. Maybe that's not allowed, but I'm going to go with
No, go
London.
for it.
I've spent a lot of time there. It is an amazing city. Um, and just to show you how the world has changed, when my parents took my brother and I to London, and they would want to go to the theater for the night, what I did was I took the underground out to Heathrow Airport and walked around for the night, and then took the underground back to central London. It's a great way to learn, at least the airport in the city. You can't do that as much anymore with security, but you used to be able to kind of wander everywhere. So I'm going to go with London, and my second choice is going to be Australia, because I think that is such an interesting country, continent, beautiful part of the world, worth the flight time to get there.
That's awesome. Isn't that weird too to think how you used to be able to walk all over the airport? I think about that all the time. And I'm like, that's so
I
wild.
know. I've got just these memories. I can't remember what I ate yesterday, but I can remember vividly walking around by myself in Heathrow Airport, just getting all the way down to the door, all the way down to the gate. That's how
Yeah.
far you used to be able to go.
I know, like you could almost sneak on. Like that is crazy. That's so insane that, yeah. But what that's pretty cool. I like that. And so a kind of the flip side of this question is, what do you think is the most underrated destination to visit?
Um, Canadian cities,
Oh,
Montreal, Toronto. I think it's so close that we don't think like, oh, it's a great destination to go to. But Montreal is a fantastic city to spend time in, whether it's the food, whether it's hockey, whether it's the culture of Montreal. It's got a great feel to it. It's close to get to. Most major cities have Air Canada or WestJet that'll get you there. So I do think Montreal is an underrated city because you don't usually hear people saying, oh, I'm going to go to Montreal for the weekend. More
yes.
people should go to Montreal.
That's actually on my list because someone told me one time too, it might have been on the podcast about it's kind of like almost like you're like it's like French. Like it's almost it feels almost like you are in like a French city.
It
Or
is a
like
French.
yeah,
It's
and it is a French city.
yeah,
So it's like it
yeah,
makes sense. It's like and it's really close. So cool.
yeah. You feel like you're in Europe. It's a very culturally diverse city, and anyone who hasn't been to Montreal needs to head there. This is a good time of year to go. It's definitely a lot colder in the winter.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So that's awesome. I love that. Okay, so another question here is what is the best meal that you've had while traveling?
Oh, I've had some phenomenal meals in Paris. I couldn't really pronounce much of it, but man, it was certainly delicious. You can have amazing street food in Paris. I mean, where you're not even spending hundreds of dollars for a meal. Brussels, I've had great sandwiches on the street as you wander around the city. Sometimes, the best meals are not the most expensive, right? They're just meals that you can catch on the fly that are prepared by locals, and you can experience the actual culture of the city.
Yeah,
Getting
and
off the
there's
beaten path is clearly the way to see most places in the world.
yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. So another question here is what is the last great book or article that you read?
Oh, well, I am reading right now um, the book that I got when I went to ASTA last week. I am reading The 50-Year History of Southwest Airlines, um,
Interesting.
which was from 2021 because they were formed in 1971. Did you know Southwest Airlines essentially formed by a lawyer, by Herb Kelleher, who was basically the lawyer for a guy who had the idea to start an airline between three Texas cities, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. And that grew into Southwest Airlines. So I'm halfway through my book on the history of Southwest Airlines.
Oh, that is cool. And yeah, and you got to go to their headquarters and they had like a big party there. It's really cool.
Yeah, I stayed an extra night just to go to that because I
You're like, I
come
must.
home Thursday night, but I wasn't going to miss an opportunity to hang out at Southwest Airlines headquarters, which was well worth the staying over an extra night.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'll have to check that book out. That's really interesting. That's cool.
I'm not sure
Um,
they sell it in too many places, but
I
I'll
know.
send you my copy when I'm done.
Ooh, nice. Yes, I love Southwest is great. I love their approach at customer service. I think that's what makes them so unique, which is really cool. And I'm sure that
So
book talks about it.
if you look at Southwest and you look at the travel industry, that's a great example of how all travel people should be, because it really is about the customer.
Hmm.
Everything we do is about the customer. And Southwest, unlike some of the other legacy US airlines that you may not feel the same way about, they always try to make it as interesting as possible. They have on a wall a bunch of quotes that their different flight attendants have said. And of course, they're kind of hilarious people
Yeah.
delivering an important message, but in a funny way. I took a picture of one that said something like, in the event of an emergency, women, children, and men will deplane first. Lawyers, bankers, and politicians will wait until the end. I thought that was perfect,
That's
right?
good. Yeah, you're like, oh man. Like
We're going to be the last people off. If you
they
if
are
you
good.
if you get to use the life vest, you get to keep it as our gift, right?
That I know it's so funny or I love too and they usually they always have funny things like that or they're like hey someone forgot a phone up here and then everyone looks and they're like so now that I have your attention it's
Right.
so good. That's
And you know
awesome.
what? They're delivering the same information that everybody else is legally required to deliver, and they're doing it in an interesting way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Love that. Okay, so the last question for you, it's one of my favorites, is what would you say is the craziest thing that has ever happened to you while traveling?
Oh, I've gotten lost while running in Africa. That is
What?
actually a
Oh,
scary thing when you're not really sure how to get back and you've gone out on a morning run in Africa and
and
you
there's
think
lions.
you think, oh, why did say lions coming after me? But that was definitely a pulse racing moment where you're like, how do I get back to where I'm supposed to be? This was in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, which is definitely a place that everyone should visit. Um, just because you saw Niagara Falls doesn't mean you don't need to see Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. But yeah, I went out for a morning run, somehow got distracted, and had a hard time finding my way back.
Oh, I feel like that probably is the run where you burned the most calories of your life on.
Yeah, I think I probably lost a few years of my life.
Yes. That is wild. Like literally.
What's your answer to the same question?
No, I feel like I always think I really should think about these more because I feel like it's just general travel. Like where there was just one trip, and it was a trip to Chicago before I lived here, where it was just like weird things just kept happening. Like, and it wasn't just one thing. It was like literally, it was like November, and a tornado was like coming and touching down, and we were in a football stadium, and we couldn't shelter, and it was just like, and it was just one thing after another, and I was just like, what is happening? I think we need to go home. And now here I am, and I live here. So all things worked out, but yeah, but luckily it is not running and getting lost in Africa. Not yet, at least. So,
oh, please, hopefully never.
Yeah. So that's kind of crazy and scary, but no, this has been awesome. It's been great chatting with you. And for real, we might need to have you on again in a few months, see what else is new, what has transpired since then. But want to thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of The Lounge with Travefy Academy. And of course, thank you to our special guest Jeff, for joining us today. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of the latest episodes. And we hope you enjoyed our conversation today and join us again. But for now, stay safe and we'll catch you on the next